What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Occupy Fantasy Football Podcast, Week 6 edition. The season is flying by. I'm Brian Jester, co-founder, co-host here at Occupy Fantasy, joined as always by my co-host and our NFL writer, Chris Rooney. What's happening, Chris?
Happy to be here off of Chase Claypool and Travis Fulgham week to talk to you about which players are going to come out of nowhere to surprise us in week 6.
Yeah, talk about surprising. We'll have some surprising names for you throughout this episode. Don't worry.
Mhm.
We're going to, as we normally do every week, talk about some injuries and impacts from week 5, look at some backfield situations, of course, look at the betting market and the slate from a high level, then get into our underperforming receivers list. We had the first official list last week or 2 weeks ago, and it's been dominating ever since. Unsurprisingly, had a big week last week. Really excited about the names on it this week, so stay tuned for that. And then we'll finish with some tight end information, not the Logan Thomas section this week, and then our favorite game stacks of the week. Before we get started, though, I have to ask you, have you used our Occupy Fantasy lineup builder yet? You can build up to 150 lineups, or you can build just a couple of lineups using our optimal lineup criteria. Jack, the creator of our Occupy Fantasy lineup builder, took home nearly $40,000 in Monday night's FanDuel single game slate. So go check it out if you haven't already, occupyfantasy.com/lineup builder. All right, Chris, let's talk about some of these week 5 injuries and impacts. Dalvin Cook, we saw on national TV pull up lame with his groin injury. They have a bye the following week. And although Mike Zimmer was a little optimistic today, I have a hard time seeing him play, which means wheels up for Alexander Madison.
Yeah, I mean, we know Mike Zimmer, right? He's kind of a gamesmanship king here and thinks he's smarter than everybody else. And he can say that, Dalvin will be ready kind of as all he wants. But I think, they would have definitely preferred to get him back out there in a big game against the Seahawks if they could. And honestly, Madison looked really, really good in the second half there. I know, obviously, they didn't win the ball game, but he got over 100 yards in limited work. So should be wheels up for him for sure in that spot.
Yeah. Now pricing was delayed because of the Tuesday slate,
Yeah.
and so we get no discount on Alexander Madison. But the question still remains: he's really good, and I would ask for those of you listening, if you were going to play Dalvin Cook at this spot at this price, would you play Alexander Madison? Because it ends up being the same thing with his skill set in this offense. All right, speaking of running backs, Le'Veon Bell was. Uh, they were trying to negotiate a trade, but shocker, fell through. He was released. And now it's Frank Gore, Lamichael Pirine. Maybe they signed somebody off a practice squad, and kind of a mess.
Yeah, it almost feels like the best landing spot for Le'Veon Bell brand would be with the New York Jets because they need a running back. No, I don't know, man. I mean, sometimes we talked about this at the beginning of the season, and I think that the process here was and the thinking was correct. It just with the specific player, it wasn't. And we basically what I'm referring to is we said with the Jaguars, maybe sometimes the answer with backfields and fantasy is no, thank you. Obviously, James Robinson has been a pleasant surprise, but I don't really see that here with Adam Gase and the New York Jets. You're right to bring up it is Frank Gore, Adam Gase's favorite player apparently, and Lamichael Pirine here, but I'm not sure we want to have exposure to either of these guys, at least in DFS.
Right. All right, let's talk about some receivers. The AJ Green underperforming Memorial receiver list is no more. AJ Green injured his hamstring, which sucks for AJ Green, but is probably great for our bankrolls, which means we no longer have to play him anymore.
Seriously. And so obviously T. Higgins had an awesome game. I think he played virtually every passing down. Routes run data was really strong for him there. So um, been a pretty strong year so far for rookie wide receiver breakouts, right? And it just feels like T. Higgins might be the next one on that list for us that hasn't quite exploded yet. So I think we definitely want to keep a close eye on T. Higgins and his matchups here.
Absolutely. DJ Chark went down kind of late in that game against Houston with an
Mhm.
ankle injury. He wasn't on the field when they were trying to make a comeback in the fourth quarter. Didn't practice here on Wednesday, so his availability is in question for Week 6. This would mean more snaps for Keelan Cole, more snaps for Laviska Shenault, and one of our underperforming receivers, a little bit of a tease here, Chris Conley would also get some more work. We saw this in that Thursday night game, and Conley got a ton of air yards when Chark was out, and we could see a similar game play out here on Sunday.
Yeah, this is for those who are very familiar with our strategy with putting together NBA information. This is very much an if-then.
Yep.
If DJ Chark is out, then we probably want to play a decent amount of Chris Conley in high risk. He doesn't run a ton of routes if Chark is active. So I prefer, even though it feels pardon me, kind of gross because he has been somewhat overperforming through the first 5 weeks of the season. I think Keelan Cole might be a little safer than Visca here, but Visca's obviously the darling of a lot in this industry, so he'll probably be pretty popular this week.
Yeah, I think so too. Whereas Conley probably will go under the radar, and we're big Conley fans here at Occupy
Mm-hmm.
Fantasy. So,
Mm-hmm.
speaking of big fans, we're big fans of Noah Fant as well, given what he done for us last year. He's likely out this week. KJ Hamler, he's dealing with that hammy. He's probably out, which should just mean a ton of looks for Jerry Jeudy, but then also Tim Patrick and Deshaun Hamilton too.
Yeah, and it's hard to really get away from the judge here, Judge Judy, against the Patriots. I mean, I think we saw how talented he is with that awesome touchdown catch that he had on that Island game. And so, going up against some really tough corners, I know they haven't performed as well as they normally do for New England here to start the season. It's probably going to be tough for some of these more replacement level wide receivers like Tim Patrick or Deshaun Hamilton to succeed. I have a feeling that Jerry Jeudy is probably the best one here.
Yeah, I would agree too, and a lot of the air yard data backs that up as well. All right, before we move on to some backfield situations, we have to talk about really quickly Dak's unfortunate ankle injury. Andy Dalton's going to step in and command this offense for the rest of the season. Now, again, this is a great scheme, really talented receivers. So while we won't see Dalton probably throw for 500 yards per game, I still think he could probably buoy some of the fantasy value of all three of these guys, plus Zeke.
Absolutely. I mean, no one is going to sit here and argue, except maybe Booger McFarland, that Andy Dalton is like an upgrade from Dak Prescott. That's just ludicrous. Booger said something on like the halftime show on Monday Night Football, like, maybe this doesn't hurt Dallas that much, which was just
Insane.
absolutely insane. But Dalton is a competent NFL quarterback. I mean, he played for years with the Bengals, and I think that's part of the problem here, Brian. I think a lot of people assign that quote unquote Bengals stink to players when they leave Cincinnati and go somewhere else. Dalton's never really had, to your point, these types of weapons to work with. He's a little bit of, I mean, he's definitely a downgrade from Dak. But if we look at the advanced data from Next Gen Stats, his average intended air yards per pass attempt over the last couple of years, pretty close to Dak Prescott's average, which was right around 8 yards over the 2 seasons. And the bigger difference here is that Dak is just clearly a more efficient passer. I think anybody who's watched Cowboys football knows that. He's completed more passes than expected by about 2% over the last couple seasons. And Dalton has basically the same data, just in the exact opposite direction. So Dalton is probably going to have his struggles, and we're going to be frustrated. But I mean, he made some great throws right into Michael Gallup's breadbasket there to win that game the other night. So we know he's capable.
Yeah, so again, we'll have to monitor this moving forward and see if the offense changes at all. But if they continue
Right.
to be pass heavy, playing at a fast pace, then a lot of these guys can still hit their value, especially in DFS. All right, let's talk about some of these backfield situations. We like to monitor how teams are using their running backs to try to get ahead of the curve or ahead of the pricing, especially on the Sunday main slates. So, four guys I want to talk about here: Devonta Freeman, David Montgomery, Kareem Hunt, and Miles Gaskin. I don't know if we want to go through every single one, Chris, but kind of just some quick thoughts on these guys.
Yeah, I think my favorite one here this week out of this group, Brian, is probably David Montgomery. I think everybody at this point is well aware of the fact that the Panthers are a defense to target with running backs. They allow over 133 rushing yards a game, and I mean, I hate using this because it's just, I think it's poor to use this as like an advanced statistic, but Carolina does allow 5.4 yards per carry, which is the second highest like in the entire NFL to opposing rushers. So there's obviously probably something to that in terms of they're just not very good at stopping the running game. So Montgomery without Tariq Cohen, remember, also getting a ton of targets now. I think he got like 6 and 8 targets in the last 2 weeks, something like that. So not much. You can't really ask for more than that at his price, which I think is in the high fives on DraftKings this week.
Yeah, I mean, super underpriced. His prices really hasn't caught up with his role. I imagine he'll be pretty popular this week. He's played 80% plus of the snaps since Cohen went down. True bell cow running back with Cohen out of the picture. Kareem Hunt, he with Nick Chubb out of the picture. Kareem Hunt played about 70% of the snaps, handled about 70% of the opportunities, but I think is probably in line with what we'll see. They're still going to mix in Dearness Johnson and whatnot, but still, with his talent level, his usage in the passing game, that's plenty enough work for him. We saw Devonta Freeman last week. he got into the end zone, was cheap, was in a pace-up game, and he was a little bit more popular than I expected to be. But I guess he fit into a lot of lineups. But I wouldn't expect to use him much moving forward, Chris. I mean, still just 54% of the snaps, 60% of the opportunities, and still not a special running back at his age.
Yeah, and on a bad team that isn't going to be favored that often, which is usually what we look for when we're trying to play some running backs here in DFS. So I think we can. It's good to keep an eye on how his usage is shaking out, but I don't think Freeman is someone we want to look at here.
What about Gaskin? I know it's not how you
Yeah,
say it, but that's how
yeah,
you
no,
say it.
absolutely. Bring in the gas here to finish out this section. Miles Gaskin with the fifth highest weighted opportunity score. So that's rush attempts plus targets times. I think it's like 2.8 or something like that over the last 5 weeks of the season. That's elite usage. I mean, that's everybody in the NFL: running backs, wide receivers, tight ends. It's usually typically running backs that lead this advanced statistic because it's carries plus rush targets, and that's obviously something that running backs get both of inside the 20.
Yep.
But the only running backs with more actual carries than the gas can inside the red zone are Derrick Henry, Todd Gurley, Ezekiel Elliott, Josh Jacobs, and we already talked about him, Kareem Hunt. I mean, you can't, if you take the names out of it, you really cannot ask for a much better usage profile than what Gaskin has here. And now he's going into a game where the Dolphins are huge favorites against the reeling New York Jets, which leads us into our next section. Brian, talk to me about some of our biggest favorites this week.
First of all, you wouldn't expect Gaskin to be in
Yeah.
a group of those names, but here we are. It's 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so speaking of some of these biggest spreads, so the Dolphins are 8-point favorites over the Jets. Second biggest favorites of the week, they're tied with the Colts, who are also 8-point favorites over the Bengals. The largest favorite of the week goes to the Patriots. They're 9.5-point favorites over the Broncos. And then the Ravens, 7.5-point favorites over the Eagles as a sky high level look at the games this week. Now, normally we'll transition here and say big favorites equals running backs we want to target, but that may not necessarily be the case this week.
Yeah, exactly. And so we look at the Patriots. I mean, interesting choice to make here if you want to play a Patriots running back. I mean, do we go with Damian Harris? He got virtually all of the carries in that last game that they had against the Chiefs in a negative game script too. So have to like the usage there, but not much. Kind of like Sony Michel, frankly, in the passing game. So that's a concern. We have Jonathan Taylor with the Colts against the Bengals here, but we've seen the passing down work just completely almost dry up for him. That's going almost exclusively to Naheem Hines as far as running backs are concerned from Phillip Rivers. So that's kind of disappointing. And we have a slate where we have Aaron Jones, who I know is, bane in your existence in showdown slates for sure. We have Derrick Henry, another one. And then Mike Davis, who has been like the lock button play at the running back position the last couple of weeks with his usage, with the number of targets that he's getting. All these running backs are favorites this week. It's just they're lower spreads, right? So Henry in the best spot, I think, getting 5 points in the early line against the Texans before they played on Tuesday Night Football, which is a very weird thing to say. So I really don't know how this is going to shake out, Brian. I do think that Gaskin probably will find his way into some of the highest owned running backs this week just because it's the Jets. But I'm not sure yet if that's where I want to go yet on this slate. I'll know more by Friday, just to tease our plug, right?
Yeah, once the plug's out on Friday, once we
Yeah.
have projected ownership, we'll have a much better idea and a much clearer picture. Real quick, why the hell is Mike Davis not $10,000 yet?
I think they're potentially hedging the risk of them activating McCaffrey. I think he's eligible to technically return, but it doesn't sound like he's close yet.
Dude, just make them both 10K. I don't care actually. Just keep making Mike Davis 7K, and we'll
Yeah.
just keep
Yeah, we'll
playing him
take
every
it.
week.
Exactly.
All right, some of the highest totals this week we have the Falcons and the Vikings, 54.5 points. Packers and the Bucks, 54 points. The Lions and the Jaguars, 54 points, and the Steelers and the Browns, 51 points. Any of these games stick out, or any of these team total leaders stick out from DFS?
Miles Garrett revenge game here against the Steelers.
Mhm.
That's kind of interesting. No, I mean, I don't know what we're going to do with that one just yet, but my favorite here, and it's got to be the one I think everybody's going to talk about all week here. It's Aaron Rodgers versus Tom Brady. It's Green Bay versus Tampa Bay. It's, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, hopefully, versus hopefully Devontae Adams, Aaron Jones, and Leonard Fournette. I mean, there's just a lot of great players here. That's probably going to be the lead of our game stack section of the week here.
I mean, we'll talk about game stacks at the very end of the show, but I mean, you have to like it because it's concentrated volume on both sides, right? You just stack Aaron Jones and Davonte Adams, maybe mix in a little underperforming receiver here we'll talk about in a second, and then you have Mike Evans, Chris Godwin on the other side, and then it's basically all the stacks you need for that game. All right, well we talked about it. Let's transition. Let's talk about these underperforming receivers. Now, for those who don't know, our underperforming receivers list basically looks at receivers who have been getting lots of opportunity in the passing game over the last 3 weeks: air yards, targets, red zone targets, percentage of their team's air yards and targets, all that information. But for whatever reason, they haven't been converting on their opportunity, which means they're in line for blow up games as long as their opportunity continues. Now, Chris, we have a really rare scenario this week where we have three underperforming receivers who were on the list last week and did well last week, but they're still underperforming. Guys like Calvin Ridley, guys like Marquise Brown, guys like Darius Slayton. If you played them last week, you were pretty happy. But the numbers show that they basically matched their expectations last week, when in reality, they're still missing that blow up game.
Exactly. I mean, these are guys that popped on our list last week because they had underperformed the trailing 3 weeks before that by so much that even with what they gave us in week 5, there's still more that we expect here because their usage remained extremely elite. That's basically just to explain what you just said another way for the listeners here. I think that Calvin Ridley is going to be extremely popular on this slate. I mean, we have Atlanta and Minnesota with, I think it is one of the highest totals in the week. Already kind of went through the spot with Madison there. I mean, we can't ignore, even though he's not an underperformer here, just the elite usage for Adam Thielen and then Justin Jefferson, who was just below him, honestly, in terms of getting elite usage as a wide receiver. So very stackable game there as well. And then we always like when we get two guys from the same game on this list that we can work into game stacks. This week, that looks like Marquise Brown with the Ravens and John Hightower, Brian, with the Eagles.
Out of
So,
nowhere, John
yeah.
Hightower with 204 air yards in week 5. Literally, no one expected this to happen. I guess no one expected Travis Fulgham to go off for what he did either, but he's getting the playing time. We'll have to monitor Deshaun Jackson and Alshon Jeffrey coming back, but we do have a list of 4 or 5 guys. A couple are injury dependent that are values and on this underperforming receivers list. So you talked about John Hightower, Darnell Mooney, who frankly shouldn't be on this list if Nick Foles threw a pass anywhere in his zip code in that Thursday showdown slate. But as a result, Mooney's still on the list. He's underperforming. We have Marquez Valdez-Scantling in that game in the Packers and the Bucks. Jeff Smith, who is minimum price, and a guy we're keeping a close eye on this week, and then Chris Conley, who we mentioned earlier. So, Chris, your thoughts?
Just don't send MVS anything on Twitter about your fantasy teams because he doesn't care. No, I like Jeff Smith a lot. It's really hard to kind of say that given everything going on with the Jets, but he's got 20 targets over the last 2 weeks.
He's
Still
he's
just
minimum price,
3K.
right?
Yeah, he's still just 3K.
Yeah.
So, at a certain point, you throw out the context of the team that he's playing for, and you just kind of have to hope that you get your 9 to 12 points minimum. And at his usage really should be more like 12 to 15, I would
Yep.
think. So, we'll see what happens there. And then Darius Slayton, I got to be honest with you. I mean, I understand that he's still on this list, but until they play Dallas again, I don't know if I have much interest there. I mean, the Giants are just really tough this year.
I think that's fair. That's fair. I'll still be playing these guys in my GPP lineups. And again, it's nice to have values. A lot of times, especially on DraftKings, we're playing expensive game stacks. We're looking to play expensive running backs. A lot of times, that final roster spot, you're looking for a cheap receiver to stick in. So to have options like Jeff Smith, like John Hightower, like Mooney, like Conley is really nice this week. And I think we'll end up seeing, as long as the injuries shake out the way we think they will, we'll see a lot of these guys in our lineup. So. All right, let's move on to the tight ends, the aforementioned or the previously named Logan Thomas section. He's been demoted. He's out of the picture. But please tell us why he's out of the picture, Chris, and if there's anybody that's taken his place in this segment this week.
Logan Thomas is dead to us, and it's not because he's costing us bankroll dollars. It's not because he's failed in DFS for 5 weeks in a row, and this speaker here has used him 5 weeks in a row. It has a lot to do with some of the things I think that we potentially may have missed over the last couple of weeks with Logan Thomas, but it's undeniable at this point. We'll end this segment, Brian, on a high note, but first let's eliminate Logan Thomas from everybody's brainwaves.
Let's do it.
Started the season getting a target on about 25% of the routes he was running per game with Dwayne Haskins in week 1 and week 2. In week 3, that dipped to about 18%. Over the last 2 weeks, he's had 8 total targets, and that's on like 6% of the routes that he runs. And we've talked about this before. When guys are still out there and getting targets, getting opportunities, targets and opportunities are a sign of talent and the fact that offenses want to utilize them as much as possible to reach, efficient results on the field. I'm going to do that all year. Washington football team has been telling us with their actions here that even though Logan Thomas is out there, they have no interest in trying to force the football to him because he's probably not that good. So I think it's time for us to say goodbye to Logan Thomas, which means it is a lock that he's going to score 2 touchdowns this
Guaranteed.
week.
Absolutely. Just lock
But
it in.
but just some of this underlying data indicates there's some other places we can go. And as far as pricing tier goes with Logan Thomas, the best place to go is Trey Burton at value at tight end for the Indianapolis Colts. He has seen a target on over 30% of his routes since he rejoined the Colts in week 4. So that's a really intriguing spot here in week 6 against the Bengals. There are 3 tight ends there are 3 tight ends, including Burton, that I like this week a lot. One of them is probably the most obvious on this slate. He's going to cost you a lot, but it's Mark Andrews. We all saw what George Kittle did against this Eagles defense, right? So just kind of let that linger a little bit in your minds. 15 catches on 15 targets, and now you've got a guy like Mark Andrews, who's basically Lamar Jackson's favorite weapon, especially as they get close to the goal line there. So Andrews probably going to be pretty popular this week. And then Austin Hooper, Brian. I mean, he has seen a target on over 30% of his routes over the last couple of weeks. He's only a little bit more expensive than Trey Burton here, going into a big game for these Browns against the Steelers. So those are my favorite tight ends this week.
Yeah, I honestly haven't read much about Hooper, why he's getting more involved as of late. If you remember dating back to the first couple of weeks of the season, wasn't used as much, a couple targets per game. But I think this is what we honestly expected when he joined the Browns. He's a good tight end, and maybe it just took a while for Baker to develop chemistry with Hooper with the limited offseason program. Who knows? But either way, Hooper is heavily involved in this offense now. It looks to be a true value at his price tag on both sites. And again, Burton a true value, and then Andrews if you're looking to pay up. Then all this is based on underlying data, not looking at the model yet, not necessarily looking at ownership projections yet, just looking at guys' opportunities in the future based on how they've been used in the last couple of weeks. All right, Chris, before we get out of here, let's talk about your favorite game stacks. Unsurprisingly, you called the Millie Maker winner a game stack. Once again, 5 straight weeks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. Fifth week in a row, Chris has called the game stack winning millionaire making lineup. So Chris, we got to hear your 3 favorite game stacks of the week.
Yes, and hopefully this week Chase Claypool or someone like him doesn't mess it up again. But do think it is Green Bay and Tampa Bay we're going to look at here pretty closely. Going to monitor whether or not Davonte Adams is actually active. I know that part of the process as far as holding him out of that Monday Night Football game a couple weeks ago was to get him through their bye week in week 5 so he would be ready to go for this Buccaneers game. So I do think the expectation that he will be ready to go is there. But if he's not, you already mentioned this, we've got MVS as an underperforming wide receiver that we can slide right into our 3-man stacks with Rodgers and Aaron Jones. So I like that a lot. Just watch them play on Tuesday Night Football, the Titans and the Texans. That is one of the games I think is super interesting this week. We saw Deshaun Watson finally have a super hot hand, especially when targeting Brandon Cooks in that game against the Jaguars. So I think that there's some potential on both sides to shoot out. Just shared with you, and I think it was CBS NFL that shared this. Ryan Tannehill has played almost as well, if not even slightly better, than Patrick Mahomes over each of their last 14 games, which is just like the most asinine thing I think I've seen today. So Tannehill obviously looking very strong, still making a lot of plays with his legs. You've got the stiff arm king there, Derrick Henry. That was crazy, huh?
Oh my God.
And then obviously we've got AJ Brown back in the mix, which certainly elevates both the floor and the ceiling, I think, for the best options on the Tennessee side to game stack. And with Minnesota, Kirk Cousins still looking deep for Adam Thielen, Justin Jefferson. We've got Madison there, and the Falcons, who might be looking to continue the trend we have here in the NFL, Brian, where the team gets their first win after they fire their head coach. So I think if that wasn't clear, like Atlanta, Minnesota, Houston, Tennessee, Green Bay, and Tampa Bay, pretty confident those are going to be the three we write up this week.
Yeah, you messaged us on, I don't know, Monday or Tuesday. And like, we got the 3 game stacks already. We
Yep.
don't need to look at anything else. We got these locked in. So we'll see if anything changes over the next couple of days. But for now, it seems like even if you're not a member, you got a free preview of the 3 best game stacks of the week by listening to this podcast, which means you should probably subscribe in your favorite podcast app or here on YouTube if you're watching the video. That way you're notified when we release this weekly podcast every single week. In addition to any special episodes we do, maybe one of you will win another 50K, and we could do a special interview with you like we did with our member Swagler Ken, who won the 50K a couple weeks ago. So for Chris, I'm Brian. We appreciate you listening. Good luck this week, and we'll talk to you next week.